Welcome to week 4 of ARTFX Tutorial Tuesday, a weekly video series about music production within Ableton Live. You might have noticed the official Loopmasters discount code at the start of this video. Use it to get a nice 10% discount on all Loopmasters products. Also, I highly recommend watching these tutorials in 1080p so you got a clear view of what I'm doing. This week we're going to import some loops from a sample pack into our project, cut these loops in smaller parts so we can rearrange them, rearrange these parts to create a better pattern that suits our beat, and apply a subtle white noise layer to fill up the background of a track. So, here we have our Ableton project from last week, which should sound something like this. This week we're going to start with adding some more percussion to this beat. Let's start by adding a new audio track by right-clicking in the track list, and let's open it up. Now let's rename this track to #loop1. The hashtag symbol is automatically replaced with the track number. Now, with this track selected, press Ctrl+D on your keyboard to duplicate this track and rename this one to #loop2. Now select both tracks and press Ctrl+G on your keyboard to group them in a group track. Now finally, rename this group track to #percussion. Now the organizing part is done and we can start focusing on the rhythmical part. Right here in my file browser, I've got some Loopmasters sample packs, and today we're going to use a pack by Ranking Audio called Glitchup. You can find the link to the sample pack in the description of this video. This pack contains a lot of high quality samples and loops, like for instance this drum kit. Damn, I love that snare drum. But today we're going to work with loops, so let's go back to the folder called Top Loops. These are some great loops to layer on top of your drum beat. Now I'm going to import 2 loops into my project. One will provide the actual hi-hat pattern, and the other one will provide a swishing sound that pulls us into the snare drum. So let's drag them on our audio tracks. So now it's time to start cutting these loops up in smaller parts so we can rearrange them into something more suitable for a track. First, let's take out this first hi-hat so it starts on the offbeat instead of the first beat. Let's select the entire section and Ctrl, click and drag it to copy it over to the other half of the loop. Now let's take out some parts to give it some room to breathe in between the hi-hat hits. First let's remove this hit after the snare to make some more room. Now let's rearrange this to make it more interesting. Well, that sounds pretty decent. Now, finally, I want to add one more edit in here. So let's cut this into a really small part and duplicate it over 3 more times to make a little glitchy effect. We can shorten these hits to make them sound even more glitchy. So for a second loop, we only need the first beat of the loop, this swooshing effect that leads us into the snare drum. So select the area you need and press Ctrl plus J on your keyboard to consolidate the clip, and Ctrl click and drag to copy it to the third bar also. Let's make this second loop a little louder so it matches the first loop in volume. Finally, select both tracks and press Ctrl plus J again, and it will turn both loops into single audio clips. Now, we need to make sure that these loops contain no low frequencies, so put in a spectrum, which you can find in the device browser. Spectrum is Live's native spectrum analyzer. So we can see that there is some unwanted low rumble in the sound when the hi-hats hit, and that there is almost nothing below 700 Hz. So let's put on an EQ8 in front of the spectrum and take out everything below 700 Hz. Now, let's also do this for the second loop. Copy the spectrum to the other track, and we can see a tiny amount of low frequencies in there. Take them out with an EQ8. Also, let's boost the highs a little to bring this sound more up front. So, that sounds pretty good already. Time to fill up our beat with some background noise. First, insert a blank MIDI track to our percussion group and load up an instance of operator. Now, create a blank MIDI clip and put in a random note for the entire length of this clip. It doesn't matter which note, since white noise cannot be played in different pitches. Also, bring down the volume so you don't hurt your ears. By default, operator plays a simple sine wave, so let's change the oscillator waveform to white noise. Now, this might sound a little harsh to the ears, so to make it a little bit lighter, let's activate the filter and choose the high pass 12 dB type filter. Now bring up the cutoff frequency until you're satisfied with the result. Now we can copy this spectrum to this track to find out how our frequency spectrum looks like. On our synths group, we added a sidechain compressor in a previous video to create the ducking effect on the synths. Let's copy that compressor and paste it on the white noise layer. This will give the white noise the same ducking effect. Now we need to fine-tune this a little bit until it sounds like we want. So now it's time to... What's that? Right. Never mind. Let's go on with the tutorial. Let's try some of the other high-pass filter types and see which one works best. Okay, so let's lower the volume on the white noise layer until you can barely hear it, since we only want this to float nicely along with a beat in the background. So now we can widen the stereo field of this white noise layer by using a chorus plugin. This is a subtle effect with which we fatten up the sound of the white noise. I don't know if you guys can hear the actual difference, but it makes it a little wider. Adjust the settings to taste. Now, let's see what happens if we widen this up even more by using a utility. This can sometimes create interesting results when used after effects like a chorus, flanger, or phaser. But for this one, I'll widen them up on a different way, since I don't like the result. So, delete the utility again and insert an audio effect rack and open up the chain list by clicking this little button. Now, create 2 chains and pan them hard left and hard right. This splits the signal in 2 and pans them all the way to the widest possible position in the stereo field. Finally, we adjust the output gain on the sidechain compressor a bit to control the volume. Okay, so now when we play the entire loop, I can hear that something is wrong with the arpeggiated lead. I think this is because it plays triplet notes, so let's change that from 1/12 notes to 1/16 notes to make it a little bit faster. Also, open up the instance of Silent 1 used for this sound and turn down the reverb so it doesn't muddies up. See, it's now perfectly timed with our hi-hats. So, that was it for this week's tutorial. Meanwhile, post all your questions, reactions and feedback in the comment below, on my website using your Facebook account or on my Facebook page. See ya next week.